In August 1963, Edward R. Murrow, head of the United States Information Agency, began producing a documentary about the upcoming March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The propaganda agency sent camera teams to film marchers in 7 states and Washington, D.C. over the course of 3 days, and gathered more than 11 hours of footage. But as the project neared completion, Murrow was losing a battle with cancer. And the film's political opponents wanted to make sure it would never be seen. President Lyndon B. Johnson tasked the groundbreaking diplomat Carl Rowan with seeing the project through.
But almost immediately, there is controversy over how USIA talks about civil rights, and Carl Rowan is put in the middle of this dispute over whether or not this documentary film should be shown overseas.
There were Southern senators in particular who felt, how can you put out this that's so critical of the United States?
In 1953, President Dwight Eisenhower established the United States Information Agency to produce and distribute American propaganda around the world.
As a one-stop shop for American foreign policy information, USIA has an astonishing range of outlets. It had Voice of America Radio, it had a global publications network. They have distribution deals so that when a major Hollywood film was released, a USIA film would accompany it onto one of the international screens.
It is ideas that change the world for good or ill. The USIA deals in ideas. USIA tells the world about peace and the dignity of the individual, about freedom.
At the heart of the Cold War were struggles over narrative. Struggles over what kinds of societies did people want to live in and participate in.
The Soviet Union focuses on race as one of the principal issues in its representation of the United States. They understand this is America's Achilles heel. How can you be the land of liberty when there is violence against African Americans, when there are 2 levels of citizenship, one citizenship for white people and a different second-class citizenship available to African Americans?
Murrow hoped a film about the March on Washington would make the case abroad that the government supported the civil rights movement.
The Constitution of the United States guarantees every American the right to protest peaceably. 200,000 Americans, then, are going to use this right.
But as Murrow's film about the march was being completed, he was losing a battle with cancer. To replace him as USIA director, President Lyndon Johnson chose Carl Rowan. Rowan had made his name as a journalist reporting on racism in the South.
In 1948, I got a job with the Minneapolis Tribune at a time when very few daily newspapers were hiring Negroes as writers. In 1951, I suggested to the editors that we had a responsibility to tell the people of this state something about the Negro citizens of this nation.
Rowan, as a journalist, he was a chronicler. In covering those 50s years, he came to realize how long and difficult the road was that civil rights activists had before them. And so making readers see that and understand it, an urgency of it, became central to his project.
With the same energy he displayed in seeking the party nomination.
During the 1960 presidential campaign, Rowan wrote a series of articles on Democratic candidate John F. Kennedy that Kennedy found surprisingly fair. In 1961, the new president offered the journalist the job of Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs. 3 years later, President Johnson appointed Rowan to succeed Murrow as head of the USIA, a job that made him the highest-ranking African-American in the U.S. government.
Carl Rowan came into the position of USIA director with a lot of knowledge of how public diplomacy worked. I think he will have also known that representation of civil rights internationally was a hot issue. But almost immediately, there is controversy over this amazing documentary film.
By the end of August 1963, in some places of the United States, a Negro could not go to school where he chose, eat where he wished, build his home where it pleased him, or find jobs for which he was qualified. He had been insulted, beaten, jailed, drenched with water, chased by dogs. But he was coming to Washington, he said, to swallow up hatred and love, to overcome violence by peaceful protest. Many people predicted violence.
Anticipating a backlash, the USIA invited reporters to view the film. There were immediate objections.
Should violence come then that day, they would call for help. Each man would have a code name. Freedom, equality, justice, jobs.
Carl Rowan is put in the middle of this dispute over whether or not this documentary film should be shown overseas.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Carl T. Rowan. As the new director of the United States Information Agency, I have the privilege to present to you a dramatic document of man's continuing...
In the end, Rowan himself speaks a preface to the film explaining that this is the way in which free men in a free country make the country even better.
It is a film about the great civil rights march in Washington, a moving exercise of one of the most cherished rights in a free society.
Part of Rowan's approach to civil rights is to emphasize the value of the United States government.
I believe that this demonstration of both whites and Negroes, supported by the federal government and by both President Johnson and the late President Kennedy, is a profound example of the procedures unfettered men use to broaden the horizons of freedom and deepen the meaning of personal liberty.
Very, very fine. We're going to wake up Lincoln and tell him to get up and stop that.
By the time Rowan becomes director of the U.S. Information Agency, a lot of the bloom has come off the rose. He is more aware of what he's up against. I don't think he was ever naive to think that these were easily fixable problems, but he's aware of how embedded white supremacy is in American foreign policy.
American embassies around the world approved of the new version of the film with Rowan's introduction.
It's difficult for us to fully conceptualize both what it meant to be black, in spaces of government during that time period. The role that he's supposed to play is supposed to create a very safe, nurturing, idyllic impression of the U.S. To have to go out and represent U.S. interests and help cultivate the kind of narrative of U.S. freedom and democracy for non-U.S. publics.
I'm sure he had misgivings about his role as the salesman for policies that he didn't always agree with. Absolutely.